2017 was a rough year in UK history. Terror attacks in Manchester, London Bridge and Finsbury Park left many stunned. Brexit votes from the previous year left the country divided, and the deadliest residential fire since World War II had taken place, claiming the lives of 72 people. Today we'll be getting into that fire and explaining what really happened at Grenfell. Today we're taking this story to Kensington, specifically North Kensington. Now Kensington is one of the most infamous areas in London for many reasons. On one side you have the wealthiest people in Europe, concentrated on private roads and gated mansions, like Kensington Palace Gardens, which is being dubbed Billionaires Row, due to literally only billionaires being able to afford to live there. And around 10 minutes away you have North Kensington, which is made up of the literal poorest wards in the whole of London, full of council flats and people living in the most deprived parts of the UK. This imbalance has pretty much made Kensington the most unequal area arguably in Europe. Within North Kensington is an estate called the Lancaster West Estate, which has been home to many people throughout the years, more notably from people fleeing the Spanish Civil War in the 1930s, and it also had a big part to play in the housing of Caribbean immigrants during the Windrush era. Since then the estate has expanded in an attempt to house more people, so in 1974 the local government built a new 24-story block of apartments, which was named the Grenfell Tower. This was at a time when the government was rapidly building low-cost apartments all over the UK, in an attempt to keep up with higher levels of immigration, and also to rehouse people after World War II. But by the time Grenfell Tower was built, these type of apartments were becoming more and more controversial, mainly due to a 1968 disaster, where a tower block in Newham in East London had collapsed only 2 months after it was created, killing 4 residents and injuring 17 more. Unfortunately, this disaster wasn't enough to alarm government officials of future incidents that would end up taking place. Grenfell had a healthy community, full of many different cultures and people who all lived in harmony. Many residents went to the same schools and places of worship, which built nice relationships across the flats. But after many years of the block's creation, residents had many safety concerns. The tower was left in a state litter covered the lobbies without many efforts to clean it, and there were also serious fire hazards all over the 24-story apartment, with no fire sprinklers, no central fire alarm, only one staircase for emergency exits, and not even to mention all fire extinguishers in the building had been long expired. It was safe to say the building had been left neglected by building officials, so a group of Grenfell residents created an online blog called the Grenfell Action Group in 2012 to report on these issues and demand action take place. The blog documented the countless battles they were having with local officials regarding the conditions of not only the Grenfell Tower block, but the state of housing conditions around Kensington and Chelsea. The Grenfell Action Group attempted multiple times to contact their local TMO, who were in charge of Grenfell's day-to-day management and repairs, but they never received a reply. So in 2013, after months of blogging about Grenfell's conditions, the bloggers were threatened with legal action by both the local council and their landlord if they didn't stop. They claimed the comments made on the blog were defamation and harassment, and the TMO even prohibited his workers from even looking at the blog at work. But Grenfell residents had every reason to believe they weren't living in safe conditions. Just 2 years before the GAG was created, a small fire had already broken out in the tower's lobby, which spread smoke across 11 stories and injured 3 people, which should have been a clear indication to the council that the smoke extractors in the building were not working properly. But stuff was starting to look up for the tower's conditions. In 2015, renovations had started taking place. Grenfell received new windows and a brand new heating system, but when renovations were finished in 2016, there was still a lot left unsolved. Just a month after the tower's work was deemed finished, an independent assessor pointed out 40 serious fire hazards within Grenfell's tower and demanded actions be taken. The Grenfell Action Group also started adding more pressure in their blogs, despite the threats of being sued. On a chilling blog post in November 2016, a resident wrote that only a catastrophic event would expose the incompetence of their landlords, and also went on to say that we predict that it won't be long before the words of this blog will come back to haunt the TMO management. After years of constant neglect, the London and Emergency Authority gave Grenfell's landlords till May 2017 to fix the fire safety issues. But just like most other attempts, these warnings were again ignored, and only a month later, tragedy struck.
Fire brigade.
Yeah, hello, hi, in the fire, flat 16 Grenfell Tower.
Sorry, a fire where?
Flat 16 Grenfell Tower.
The fire brigade are on their way. Are you outside?
Yeah, I'm outside.
Yeah, well the fire engines are on their way. Just tell me how many floors you got there.
It's the fourth floor.
Right,
okay. Quick.
They're on their way already. Yes, I know it's burning, but they are on their way. You've only just called, as long as you're okay. Yeah?
Okay.
In the early hours of the 14th of June 2017, a Grenfell resident called Bilal Kabedi was suddenly awakened by a smoke alarm after his fridge freezer exploded. His flat was completely covered in smoke, so minutes after waking up, Bilal called the fire brigade and banged on his neighbor's door letting them know about the fire. It only took 6 minutes for the first firefighters to arrive to the scene, but at this time the fire looked nothing more than a 5-man job to put out. At 7 minutes past 1 in the morning, while most residents were sleeping and unaware of the small fire, a few firefighters entered flat 16 where the fire had started, but within a few minutes a bigger problem was arising. The fire was now spreading to the outside of the building. Now remember back in 2015 when Grenfell underwent some renovations to fix his heating efficiency? One of the ways they done this was by cladding the outside of the building, which gives buildings better insulation and weather resistance. But despite its benefits, cladding is very flammable, especially if you use cheaper versions. Now during renovations there was many options for Grenfell in terms of cladding companies, many with different levels of fire resistance, but unfortunately they opted for a cheaper version with not much fire resistance, a decision which would prove to be fatal. While firefighters were still battling the fire in flat 16, the fire kept advancing floor by floor on the outside of the building. At this time it was thought that the best policy would be for all residents to stay put in their flats, but soon people would start doubting this advice. At 1:18 AM, 34 people had already escaped from the tower. Luckily for some it was Ramadan at the time, so quite a few Muslim residents were still awake to eat their pre-dawn meal before they started their fast. In an attempt to stop the fire spreading on the outside of the building, firefighters started using external jets, but by 1:30 AM, the fire had reached the top floor, and it was starting to become clear that this fire was not going out. So then the rescue mission started. Due to the fire doors in the building being faulty, smoke started to spread into the lobbies and flats. For some sleeping residents, this would have been their first indication of any fire taking place. By around 1:30 AM, London's fire brigade started receiving their first calls from residents trapped inside the building. People who got through to the fire brigade was asked what floor and flat number they were in, and also asked how many people they were with. They were then instructed to stay put and that help would come, believing that instead of people rushing outside of the building through one stairwell, it would be much safer for the firefighters to come in and rescue people flat by flat. But as time went by and the smoke intensified, some doubted any help would come before it's too late. Many took refuge in flats on different floors, hoping that the smoke would be less intense in different parts of the building. In one case, 12-year-old Jessica Ramirez was stuck alone in her family's flat on the 20th floor. She called emergency services where she was told help was on the way after giving her flat number. But when firefighters arrived to her flat, she had already made her way to the 23rd floor where she later passed away. The fire was spreading quicker than anyone could have imagined. By this time, word started going around about what was happening, and big crowds started forming outside of the tower. And with the increased amount of noise and activity going on outside, emergency units started struggling to communicate through their radios videos due to the noise. So instead, details of trapped residents started to get wrote on pieces of paper and then ferried over to the firefighters on the front line, slowing down the rescue process significantly. By 2:47, the stay put policy was abandoned, and now the advice was to get out of the building by any means necessary. The scenes were chaotic. From the outside in, you could see residents frantically screaming for help. Some switched their lights on and off to show they were still alive, and some even held their young children near windows as a plea for someone to come and save them. Others took more drastic plans to survive, jumping out of their higher floors or running through smoke-filled stairs, passing many lifeless bodies through the way. Survivors described the smoke as so thick that they couldn't even see their hands. Father of two, Roy Smith, spoke on when he looked outside of his 12th floor apartment. He saw numerous people making the daring jump from the high-rise building before he made his escape. At least 4 residents died from injuries sustained from the jump, one of these being a 57-year-old called Mohammed Neda, a man who escaped Afghanistan with his wife in 1998 due to the risk posed by the Taliban. Mohammed and his family lived on the top floor, and during the fire allowed their house to be used as a refuge for families who were stuck in lobbies and had nowhere to go. Mohammed instructed his son and wife to take a chance and run through the stairs to try and escape, but while they made their escape thinking Mohammed was behind them, Mohammed stayed back, refusing to leave behind the family who had entered the flat in a bad state. In his final moments, he called a family member and said, "I hope I have not disappointed you," then made his leap to death. Outside of the blaze, emergency services got together in numbers. Ambulance crews raced any victims to nearby hospitals. Firefighters were tackling the fire from the outside, while some ran to the highest points of the building not knowing if they will make it out. And police officers shielded any civilians from any debris falling from the building and guided unharmed residents to a nearby community center. After 7 hours of the fire, the last person to be rescued was an elderly blind man named Elpido Bonatisio at 7 minutes past 8 in the morning. Luckily, the position of his flat made it less affected. The day after, support flooded in all through the country. Survivors were evacuated to nearby churches, mosques and temples. Donations of food, water and clothes were pouring in for the people who had lost everything. Residents of nearby flats were moved due to fears of the tower collapsing, and local schools and train stations were closed. But now the race was on for relatives of residents to find their family members. It took over 5 months for the official death toll to come out, leaving friends and families of the victims frantically handing out posters, checking in with hospitals and posting all over social media to find out if their loved ones had made it out alive. It was eventually announced that 72 kids and adults had lost their lives, the youngest being only 6 months old. And now the British public had turned their sadness to anger. Peaceful protests had broke out all over London demanding justice. Now the pressure was on for answers to come out, when then Prime Minister Theresa May made a visit to some of the survivors of the fire. She was met with herds of hecklers, many believing she should resign. 2 months after the fire, on the 15th of August 2017, a full public inquiry began to take place, with many stuff discussed in the inquiry being the same issues published by the Grenfell Action Group years before the fire. 7 years later, the effects of Grenfell were still ongoing. Many of the heroic firefighters have been diagnosed with rare cancers from the high levels of smoke, and many survivors are still suffering with severe PTSD and anxiety. Some changes have been made since the tragedy. The London Fire Brigade has now been kitted with the biggest ladders in Europe and better communication tools, one being the ability for victims to show videos of the incidents to control officers. There's also been a few major changes towards landlords' responsibilities and tougher rules on building regulations, but some of these rules have been hit with some controversy though, due to many small-time landlords not being able to keep up with the higher demands and the increase in insurance premiums, resulting in many losing their properties to bigger corporations. But some still believe that the case is not done until somebody is convicted for the fire. Till this day, no one's been judged for Grenfell, and many have vowed to never stop campaigning until this happens. The tower still remains up as a reminder of what happened that fatal night, a reminder of the lives lost and the heroes that prevented many more. Hopefully this is enough of a reminder for this to never happen again. It's been your boy Kid Nerd, and peace out.